voice can break the dark. A single spark ignites the heart. But if we turn when justice calls, the chains we forge will bind us all. When truth is silenced, when lies take hold, the cost is freedom, the soul grows cold. No one stands tall while another must fall. Freedom for one depends on freedom for all. We're mavericks of freedom, rebels in the fight, defending every voice, defending every right. For the moment we falter, the moment we stall, we lose our own freedom when we let others fall. You can't stand free while others kneel. When justice fades, it's freedom they steal. An innocent condemned, a crime unspoken, and with it the bond of liberty is broken. No tyrant rules without our consent. Oppression thrives where silence is spent. Stand for the weak, the silence the small, or freedom will crumble for us all. We're mavericks of freedom, guardians of the light, fighting for the truth, for what is just and right. For the rights of one are the rights of all. We rise or we fall by answering the call. Even those we may oppose deserve the rights we all uphold. For if we deny them what is fair, we build our own prison in despair. The fight's not easy, it never will be, but justice for one is the key to be free. We stand as mavericks, together we strive, defending the rights that keep freedom alive. We're mavericks of freedom, rebels in the fight, upholding every truth, protecting every right. When one is oppressed, we're all in the thrall. Freedom for one depends on freedom for all. So take a stand, let your courage rise. Defend the truth, don't compromise. For the soul of the world, the writing's on the wall. Freedom for one depends on freedom for
Greetings, Mavericks and new viewers. Tonight, direct and live from the Maverick News Network World Studios. This is Maverick News with Rick Walker.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Maverick News Channel. 44 seconds of chaos and sheer terror. That's how passengers are describing the crash landing yesterday at Pearson International Airport. We have new video to share with you tonight. We'll do that off the top of the program. And also joining us live tonight is Mike McCarrick. He's back to help us with some expert analysis of today's negotiations between the United States and Russia. Administration officials on both sides meeting in Saudi Arabia, but not with the participation of either EU leaders or Ukraine. Mike will help make sense of all of that tonight with us, so stay tuned. We'll show you that video of this new video of the plane crash that happened yesterday in Toronto on the other side of this.
Greetings, brave Mavericks. Our quest for truth continues. We go beyond fake news. Together we expose propaganda. Together we pull others out of rabbit holes. We are maverick thinkers. We are all unique individuals, defenders of individual rights and freedoms, credible, trusted, grounded in reality. Maverick News, Maverick News. Defending free speech, free speech. Donate at freedomreporters.com. Do it now. Tomorrow may be too late. Maverick News. The world is watching.
Okay, and before we get to anything else, I have to show you the new video of the plane crash from yesterday out of Pearson. Here it is here. Now, they have recovered the black box. And as I figured yesterday, we didn't have clear video, but this shows what I figured basically happened.
Oh, fuck! Oh, no.
The wings came off, and that allowed the fuselage to then roll over onto
Sorry,
its
you're seeing
roof.
this airplane just crash into Greek. Oh my god. Oh my god. Well, hold here. Come on, take me out.
And so while some people are saying that it was 44 seconds of chaos and terror, I'm saying, my perspective, it was a miracle. Over 80 people involved, a large number of them taken to hospital. Everybody released except for 3 people, though, who remain in pretty serious condition. Their exact condition tonight, I haven't received an update, but I understand they could be in critical condition, and at least one child taken to Sick Kids Hospital as well. Joining us now is Mike McCarrick. Welcome back, sir.
Thanks for having me back.
Our privilege, and we need you tonight to help us make sense of what the heck is going on in Saudi Arabia, where we had Marco Rubio and other officials from the U.S. side meeting with Russian officials, including Foreign Minister Lavrov.
That assumes that I understand what's going on, but yes. So yeah, there's a lot of I'm seeing it and I'm comprehending it. I'm having problems believing it. That's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, very unusual.
So yeah, there's a couple of things. I mean, the Lavrov doesn't necessarily surprise me because I mean we sent our Secretary of State and Marco Rubio, and Lavrov is his equal in Russia. Yeah. Reportedly, Putin also sent somebody else who was a friend of his daughter and a close friend of Putin, who didn't take part in the meetings, but he was evidently there to make sure that Lavrov and the other people involved were not freelancing, shall we say, that they were towing the party line, which is interesting when you send your top foreign secretary, Lavrov, and you don't trust him. So that was an interesting sidebar to today's negotiations. Marco Rubio was careful in the language that he used, that he said that there were a couple of things that they covered, restored staff at the embassies, talking about what sort of economic sanctions America might be able to lift in return for whatever. There were no details on pretty much anything. The Russian side left a little bit disappointed, and I wish I had copied their response, but it was basically like nothing happened. It sounded to me like it was a listening session where the top diplomats for the different nations came together to hear each other out, but I don't see anything that they might have said that was not what we've already been hearing. I've said before, and I've maintained that if Russia wanted to stop this war, they're really the only nation on the planet that could stop this war unilaterally. They could just go home. Ukraine doesn't want to fight. Ukraine wouldn't follow them. Ukraine doesn't have the power to follow them. NATO's not at war. So it's if Russia went home, it would be over. There would be, of course, lingering questions about war crimes, both big and small, but those are going to be lingering no matter what else happens. So the only nation that could end this right now is Russia. So I don't necessarily understand what these talks were about or what they expected to get out of them. But the flip side of that, can you still hear me?
Yeah, I just had to mute my mic before I coughed.
The flip side of that is something that I mentioned to, for those that don't remember, I have traveled in Ukraine quite a bit. I know a lot of Ukrainian frontline soldiers personally. And this was, maybe 2-3 years ago when somebody mentioned that the chances of a negotiated settlement would come up. And I did point out that all wars end with negotiation at some point. Even if it is unconditional surrender, you still have to negotiate. Well, how does that actually play out in the real world? So all wars, at the end of the day, will end in a negotiation. And the only so the negotiations existing doesn't necessarily worry me. The part that does worry me is that the only people at this current table were Russia and the United States. The United States is not currently at war. So you didn't even have both warring parties at the table today. And to me, that is a huge problem. Trump has a history of this. I mentioned this last time, where in 2020, Trump completed negotiations to end the war in Afghanistan, but he only negotiated with the Taliban, and he completely cut out the government of Afghanistan. So that had predictable results, where now Afghanistan is a train wreck, where it's restored radical Islamist rule, theocracy. Women have no rights. Children have no rights. It's a real problem in Afghanistan right now, and it has everything to do with the way Trump negotiated the end of that war. Whatever you might think about the mess of how we pulled out, that is a separate issue from the negotiations. Well, it is related. We can get into that if you want, but the fact that Trump reached that negotiation with only the Taliban is a real problem, and it does not. This is why people are worried about only Russia and the United States talking and not including Ukraine, because of what we saw that's happened and is still happening inside of Afghanistan. There are other issues going on. Rubio claims that he spoke with foreign ministers of France, Germany, and Italy and the United Kingdom. I don't know what discussions might or might not have happened with Ukraine. None of those have been confirmed, at least that I saw yet, by those nations. It would surprise me if Marco Rubio didn't do that. He's one of the few adults in the room right now in Trump land. So we'll see what happens. I don't know what could be on the table. There's rumors running around. If people know Michael McFaul, he was a former top diplomat from the United States who still has contacts in the State Department and other places. He said that Trump's team has allegedly offered Putin Ukrainian territory, no NATO membership for Ukraine, no U.S. soldiers in Ukraine. This one is really weird. The withdrawal of U.S. troops from Europe, which came up in the first Trump term. I don't know how many people remember that. Including in the frontline states of places like Poland and Romania and the Baltics. And then sanctions relief, which actually doesn't surprise me. Sanctions relief is probably one of the first things that the United States could offer as a carrot in these negotiations. One thing I did not hear anything about is the frozen Russian assets. So the outgoing Biden administration gave Ukraine 20 billion of those frozen Russian assets in December. The United States only holds another 5 billion in frozen Russian assets. there is over 300 billion held by European nations. So what the United States could do on that is extremely limited. We'll see if that comes up, how that comes up. You'd have to use contacts in the European nations to do that. We can start with that, or I can go on to what Trump said today, which was highly worrying.
Well, let's start kind of with what Zelenskyy has said today about this.
Because he was supposed to go to Saudi Arabia and he stopped. He canceled. He went to Turkey, and he's like, what's the point?
Yeah. So what do you make of where he's at?
I think he's worried. I think he's justifiably worried. He's been trying to do a good job of appealing to Trump's vanity and pride. How successful he is, I'm not sure yet. Trump said today that he likes Zelenskyy personally, so Zelenskyy must have made some progress there. How many people might remember that Trump's first impeachment, Zelenskyy was heavily involved with, not as an actor, but Trump was impeached over attempting to extort President Zelenskyy. He was threatening to withhold American aid unless Zelenskyy opened up some sort of sham investigation into then candidate Biden prior to the elections, because Biden was looking like one of the top candidates for 2020 back then. So there was a strained relationship between Zelenskyy and Trump already. So it looks to me like Zelenskyy over the last couple of months has done a very good job trying to build that. However, he doesn't have the 10 plus years that Putin has of living rent free inside of Trump's brain. So the progress that Zelensky's made is limited but real. So we'll see how that goes. What we really need is for Europe, the rest of NATO, especially nations like Japan and Australia, and just basically citizens to insist that Ukraine has a place at this negotiating table. We can't have a repeat of Afghanistan. So that just can't happen. If it does, it would be a complete disaster, and it would just create more problems in the very near future. You would be looking at Moldova is probably next, but also the Baltics. Trying to establish a land route between Belarus, Russia, and Kaliningrad that would take over European land. There's all sorts of next moves that Russia could do, and if we just basically give Ukraine to Russia, then there's real danger of what would happen next. I think Moldova would be the low-hanging fruit there. That would be very quick.
Yeah. What do you make of, like, the Russian narrative is that there was a coup in Ukraine in 2014, right?
Funny you say that, because Trump today actually repeated a lot of Kremlin talking points, which is astonishing to see from the President of the United States, who is obviously acting as a mouthpiece of Russia, which is just weird.
I have a clip of him up. Is this the clip that you're
I don't know. I don't know the bottom scroll, but the background is the same to the clip that I was watching.
Well, let me play this one, because this sounds like very much like something comes straight out of the Kremlin to me.
Do you have any message for Ukrainians who, after 3 years of fighting, might feel betrayed or disappointed at not having a seat at these initial talks in Saudi Arabia?
Well, I think I'm really disappointed in what's happened. I've been watching this for 3 years. It's a war that would have never happened if I was president, and I've been watching these people being killed at levels that you've rarely seen, not even close, since the Second World War. And I'm very disappointed. I hear that they're upset about not having a seat. Well, they've had a seat for 3 years, and a long time before that. This could have been settled very easily. Just a half-baked negotiator could have settled this years ago, I think without the loss of much land, very little land, without the loss of any lives, and without the loss of cities that are just laying on their sides. You have those magnificent golden domes that are shattered, will never be replaced. You can't replace them. 1,000-year-old domes that are so beautiful, you can't replace that. The whole civilization has changed because of what. So when they're worried about not being seated, you mean somebody that should have gone in and made a deal a long time ago.
Sorry, we lost your audio, Mike. That's strange.
That was me. No, I clicked mute. I was drinking coffee. Yeah, so he is in Neville Chamberlain territory right here, because what negotiations were even possible? Ukraine didn't invade Russia. Russia invaded Ukraine. Now they were at war starting in 2014, but it was relatively frozen. It was basically sniper and the occasional artillery shell. I mean, it was real. There were casualties. There were clashes on a very small scale, but there was not mass formations. The number of troops were fairly low. There was just not much going on between 2014 and 2022 in terms of territorial changes. The front line didn't change all that much.
You know, the uncomfortable truth for Trump is that, well, he says the war would never have happened. The truth is, while he was in office the first time, you had that conflict.
It was at war.
Break.
Yeah.
It was at war the whole time.
So why didn't, if he claims that he's all super powerful and could have ended this, why didn't he end it between 2017 and 2021?
Right. Yeah.
What Trump did between 2017 and 2021 is he created a lot of chaos in the Western allied nations in terms of their relationship with each other. Some of that might have been bluster. We've spoken about this before, that Trump was very insulting and brash and just not exactly a good negotiating partner, not somebody that's acting like a friend. But he raised important points about most European and NATO nations were not paying their treaty obligated amount of the defense, the collective defense, which is what NATO's about, is collective defense. So he had a very valid point. He was a complete jerk about it, but it wasn't anything that President Obama or President Bush hadn't said before him, or President Biden said after him. Now, in 2021, when Trump left office, there were 32 NATO nations, if I did my math right. I might be wrong. There might have only been 30 because of Sweden and Finland. But the Northern Macedonia was, I think, the last one. But only 6 nations of those 30-something were above the 2% treaty obligation. And that's when Trump left office. So he made almost exactly zero headway since taking over for President Obama. Now, when Russia invaded, after President Biden took over, Biden, of course, had been in government since 50 years. He knew a lot of people in NATO governments personally. And so it very quickly came together under Biden's head, where it went from 6 to, I think there's only 5 nations that are not meeting treaty obligations. Canada is one of them, as I've said repeatedly on this show. Needling, sorry. But the collective response from NATO to the very real threat of Russia invading a European nation and with huge masses of troops is astonishing. And now we're looking at Trump throwing that away again, if any of these rumors are true. That isn't the only thing that Trump said about Ukraine started this war, which is a Russian talking point. And I should point out that his notion of negotiations very much confuses making peace with surrendering. How many people remember that in February of 2022, the United States didn't think that Ukraine could hold out? We offered President Zelenskyy safe passage out of Ukraine, either as an exile or to head a government in exile. But Zelensky famously said, "I don't need a ride; I need ammunition." And so the very Churchillian statement that no, we're going to fight because this is our homes that they're coming after. Trump doesn't understand that. I had a different argument with a former colleague, about how Trump views military service or this kind of sacrifice, or the notion of when somebody comes after you, you defend yourself using force. The incident happened in 2018. I don't know if you remember this, but it was in Paris, celebrating the 100th anniversary of the end of the First World War, where President Trump was in Paris. He got there on the 9th, I believe. I do know that on the 10th, he was scheduled to go to the Meuse Argonne American Cemetery, which holds the combat dead from several battles, but the big one was Bellewood, which is when the U.S. Marines became U.S. Marines in many ways. The Germans nicknamed the Teufelhunde, the devil dogs, and it's sacred ground, hallowed ground to United States Marines. Trump was scheduled to visit that. His chief of staff was John Kelly. General John Kelly is a retired U.S. Marine. It was shockingly, France in November is rainy and cloudy. I know that should shock anybody that's been to France in November, but that's the way it is. And it dawned when he was supposed to go. The 10th of November dawned, and Trump decided he didn't want to go. The White House claimed that it was a weather-related thing and ground transport was not available. That was all garbage, which I can address. But the real story was, and confirmed by General John Kelly, who was Trump's chief of staff at the time, that Trump was like, I don't want to go there. There's just a bunch of losers and suckers that are buried there. He doesn't understand what this sort of sacrifice that Zelensky was pushing up, this sort of pushback, this sort of grit and courage. Trump doesn't understand it. It's completely foreign to him. He just doesn't get it. The other things that in that same situation, the same interview, news conference, whatever you were calling it, that Trump was giving just now, he said that there should be elections in Ukraine, which is also a Russian talking point, because in the Ukrainian constitution, while Ukraine is being invaded and there are foreign troops on Ukrainian soil and martial law has been declared, under the Ukrainian constitution, they cannot have elections. So if Zelensky wanted to have elections, he'd have to violate the Ukrainian constitution. So that's another Kremlin talking point. And it sounds great to people that have no idea what they're talking about. And of course, like I said, Putin is living in Trump's brain rent-free, and Trump just repeated Kremlin talking points. Another one in that same thing is he repeated the Kremlin talking points that Zelensky has a low approval rating, which Zelensky's approval rating has been going down. It is currently at 52%. The most recent numbers we have are December 24. Him pushing back on Trump, it might have actually gone up. But that is down. In the fall of 23, this was probably before the 2023 offensives puttered and didn't accomplish anything. He was at 77%. So he's at 52%, down from 77%. But Zelensky's approval is higher than Trump's currently, where Trump's disapproval is higher than his approval. His approval is only at 47, 48%. His disapproval is at 49, 50%, according to polls that are out today. So Trump was repeating the exact same Kremlin line. I believe Trump used the absurd number of 4%, which who knows where that came from. But the concept that Zelensky is not popular in Ukraine is false. So
why do you think the Russians, I mean, I have my own take, but why do you think the Russians keep pushing for Ukraine to have an election?
Well, they want to meddle. The other thing is, how would you hold an election inside of Ukraine currently? So some of the places are relatively easy, Lviv and Kiev, and for even Kharkiv, which is under shelling. You could do an election in those places, Odessa. There's lots of places where an election would be relatively easy. However, how do you hold an election in Donbass and Luhansk, Kherson, and Crimea? How do you, this would be a lesser concern, but still a problem. How do you get the Ukrainian citizens that are refugees abroad? They are in semi-official status in the nations that are currently helping them out. How do you get their votes going? You could do that, but it would be an undertaking. And so any election that Ukraine would hold right now would be a little weird. And so no matter what the outcome would be, if Zelenskyy won with an 80% vote, Russia could point out that it was a weird election and it might not have been completely valid, which is rich coming from Russia, because I don't think Russia has ever had a valid election. People don't necessarily realize this, but the Soviet Union pretended to have elections. And so who knows when the last time Russia actually held an election. So that's kind of their point. We've discussed this before, where Russian disinformation and hybrid warfare, if you prefer that term, goes after the acronym FUD, F-U-D-D. So fear, uncertainty, doubt, and despair. Their goal is despair, and they will use fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So if they're pushing for a Ukrainian election, whether Ukraine has an election or not, that you're going after uncertainty and doubt just by raising the issue. That's the goal. So this is very much a Russian campaign to try and discredit. Trump speaking with Putin one-on-one. I'm sure there were no diplomats at the table. He did that in his first term as well, infamously, where I'm sure Putin is giving him these points, and Trump is obviously repeating them in an official presidential news conference.
If you can meddle in the election and have a leader installed that is in your back pocket, you win the war.
Yeah.
Without using hard power, right?
Yeah, I don't think any version of election that would be held in Ukraine right now, I think Zelenskyy would win it. I think there are serious people in Ukraine that would run against Zelenskyy. They have alternate ideas. They're not necessarily bad. There are pro-Russian groups that might try and run, but I would be confident Zelenskyy would win, just from the people that I know. Even the people that have doubts about Zelenskyy, there's what's the alternative?
So do you think they'll pull Ukraine into the negotiations at some point? Because today, it was just an initial meeting, I guess, is kind of the way it went. I think they agreed to put staff back in embassies, or something like that, right?
That's really low-hanging fruit. The other thing that I heard they were talking about was maybe resuming bilateral nuclear proliferation treaties. I don't know how many people remember, but basically there's either zero or only one nuclear treaty between the United States or NATO and Russia that still stands. Most of them are gone, and that one was, the last I checked on it was like late last summer, so it might have fallen by now. My memory is a little cloudy on that one. But it basically, all of the treaties that we had with Russia, the SALT treaties and the intermediate range, the nuclear cruise missile, all of those treaties that we had with Russia they're gone. They don't exist anymore. Most of them fell apart under Trump, and at least one of them fell apart under Bush 43. That was, I believe, the anti-ballistic missile treaty. And then after February of 2022, they weren't going to restart again. That is one chip on the table that, if Trump can make it work, I would like to see, but we'll see how that goes.
And the EU also not involved today, and yet Trump and the new administration making it clear over the last, well, certainly during the Munich Security Conference, that they expect European nations to step up and sort of take the wheel on dealing
So
with security in Ukraine and Europe.
this might be one of the few things that now I'm sure the entirety of what Trump would think on this I'm going to disagree with Trump on, but the aspect of Europe taking the lead on any security guarantees to Ukraine I'm actually okay with, especially as Europe starts to increase its defense spending up to more rational levels, considering the current threats that we're facing in the world today between Russia and Iran, China, North Korea. You know, after you get down to North Korea, you get to pretty small threats, but they're still real, and they might be regional, but they're still real.
But how do you justify saying you guys are going to be responsible from now on, and then you go and have negotiations that they're not even involved in? How do you?
You can't.
You know, that doesn't make sense to me.
So the thing with the thing that gives me at least some hope is that we have this example of Trump not understanding negotiations or, you know, obvious outcomes of negotiations in how he withdrew from Afghanistan, but it's more complicated in Ukraine, where Ukraine, the Afghanistan government was never very good. At the end, it was approaching competency. They had a leader that had at least some legitimacy. We completely cut him off at the knees and abandoned him, but at least he had something, versus his predecessors, which had almost nothing. Now in Ukraine, you have Zelenskyy, who is a highly respected person around the world. You have all of these NATO nations that have serious economies that have very much a stake in this. There are a lot of very serious people that are involved in this that are insisting that they be involved. So I don't see this. I don't see the direct Russia-United States negotiations coming up with a real peace deal. If they do bear fruit without Ukraine and the rest of Europe or NATO, all I can see is the outcome of the United States abandons Ukraine and abandons NATO. I don't think Trump necessarily wants that, because everybody would rightfully say that he surrendered and he's weak and he abandons his friends and, you know, is just this is a terrible president. Like I said, Trump has this fragile ego, so I don't think that is all that likely, but Trump is coming into a second administration as a kind of a different animal. So my predictive powers, you know, my confidence in whether something's likely or not has gone way down, given the last month or so of the second Trump presidency.
But regardless of what he does, I think that damage is already being done, because I've been seeing interviews with various people out of, especially the UK, who there was, I don't recall who it was specifically, but he was asked, he wasn't a government, might have been a government official.
Was it Starmer?
No, it wasn't Keir Starmer. It was somebody else. But the point is, he was asked on Times Radio, can we trust the Americans anymore? Long pause, and the answer is, I don't know.
Yes. And this was one of the things that Biden was making significant progress on, trying to repair the damage from the first Trump administration had done to our alliances. And now that Trump's back in power, they're right to say they don't know. So do I trust Trump? No, I don't. So
that's why we saw this emergency meeting take place with the EU leaders. They're scrambling, trying to assess and now plan for the future, a future that maybe has a different relationship with the U.S.
I will say that Europe has seen, because when Trump announced his second candidacy, he had a real base of support. The chance for him winning was always very real and very significant. So Europe has seen this coming. They've been preparing for it for at least a year, probably a bit more. And it's been fairly comprehensive between the increases in defense spending Europe-wide, the help for Ukraine, both humanitarian and military, the very real effort, especially after 2023, to because sending them direct aid and, you know, old Bradleys, whatever we're sending them, old Leopard tanks, was not necessarily a sustainable supply chain for Ukraine. So there's been a very real effort to establish defense industrial production inside Ukraine, staffed by Ukrainians. So that's been a very real, very ongoing, at this point, somewhat long-term project from the Europeans, and it had the help, consent, and support from the Biden administration, because we didn't know if Trump won, then we needed to have something in place. So yeah, that's been worked on. I think Ukraine is currently building 250,000 drones per month, I think was the figure that I just saw, which was astonishing, but not out of line from what I saw. If people don't remember, I was part of a joint NATO NGO delegation to Ukraine in October. One of the things that we did was we visited drone manufacturers and the people making anti-drone systems that include but is not limited to jammers. So we visited almost 38 manufacturing centers. There are thousands, even tens of thousands of those scattered all through Ukraine. People with day jobs help these things out. So you might have a day job at a bank or whatever your job is, school teacher, and then at night what you're going to go home to, or you're going to go to a different place where they have, somebody rented out like a 2-3 story building, and you have a little workstation there with a soldering iron, or if you know software and you're going to work on coding, but you're going to start working on drones for a couple hours. And so even aside from the full-time workers, you have cottage industries of people in their off time going to help the Ukrainian defense industry. Rheinmetall in, I believe it was November, opened the first heavy equipment factory and repair facility inside of Ukraine, run by Ukrainians. So we're talking Lynx infantry fighting vehicles, Leopard tanks, that kind of thing. Supposedly the first brand new Lynx infantry fighting vehicle was delivered, but that was not confirmed. So that would be something, if I was Ukraine, I would probably keep secret. So the confirmation might be 10 years from now, kind of a thing.
And do you think the buildup among European nations is maybe something that has been kept a little bit secret? Are they in better shape than maybe we're being told?
Well, better shape is a relative term. How do you quantify that? If you look at the gross domestic product of NATO, the United States is between 55 and 60% of the total GDP of NATO. If you lose the United States, that means you're losing more than half. And it's more than that, because while the United States defense industry atrophied after the Cold War and didn't really start to build itself back up until 2014, which sounds like a lot of time, but it's not, considering the atrophy that happened. Europe's atrophied worse than ours did. So the wake-up call for Europe, if you take away, so some European nations started earlier. Poland, for instance, is a very shining spot in terms of industrial production for weapons. Romania is not as good, but they were making progress. The 3 Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, they're tiny, but they're kind of, they punch way above their weight. So you have parts of Europe that started to rearm sooner. The rest of Europe has only been 3 years. February 2022 was their wake-up call. That's when they restarted. That's really not much time. So are they better off than we think they are? They haven't really hit the news, certainly not in the United States. I know about them because I pay attention to them, and I was kind of part of it, at least a little bit. And so I'm aware of it, but no, it hasn't gotten the headlines. I don't think people have been paying attention. There's complications where you could have an entire podcast on the problems and the bright spots in Germany. That's such a complicated issue right there. You could have a relatively positive discussion about Poland, that kind of stuff.
And I've been wondering this week about the actual capabilities that European forces would have if the United States was no longer an ally, because it seems to me the Trump administration is pivoting so hard that within a matter of maybe even a year, and I'm even hearing talk like this, that they could be more aligned with Russia than the traditional Western allies. And if that were to be the case, where would the EU be if that happens? Because you need access to, for instance, satellite surveillance and communications, sure, right? And the U.S. pretty much is the provider of those kinds of services.
There was a strong integrated defense network inside of NATO, and it's more than satellites. The bulk of the aerial refueling was American. Not all of it. The United Kingdom, for instance, has a relatively robust tanker fleet. They also built in the ability to rapidly expand. They have some civilian jet airliners that you basically have to attach the refueling boom to, and they're ready to go. The withdrawal of America from NATO would be a huge loss. I don't know. Like I said, my predictive power is a little bit weird, but then again, President Trump was spouting Kremlin talking points in an official presidential news conference today. So it's a little bit worrisome, more than a little bit.
Although some people might be cheering, saying,
"Yeah,
well, that's great. It means we won't have a nuclear war because, we'll just be an ally with Russia."
So the other thing that complicates this question is starting under President Obama. There was maybe this was just because I was active duty military. There was something called a pivot to the Pacific, where countering China became incredibly important. That's also important to the Trump administration. And various nations, including Australia, Japan, South Korea, are heavily involved in that. The United Kingdom is more involved than you might think. We're trying to make progress into India, which is such a huge rival to China, even to the point of Trump offering India F-35s just in the past week. So we'll see how this goes, but
he offered which nation F-35s?
India. So India was one of those weird nations. This is a tangent, but when the British Empire broke up after World War II, as Canada is probably well aware of that history, at least the Canadian part of it, when India broke off, they were not happy under British rule. That might be the understatement of this podcast. Mm-hmm. But that meant that post-World War II and then getting into the Cold War, when India became independent, India was one of those nations that was relatively neutral. And I'm a nerd for military gear, and India was fascinating because they had this really weird Frankenstein military where they had British weapons and French weapons, but they also had Soviet weapons, and sometimes on the same platform. So you might have an Indian naval ship that was, just as an example, built by the Soviets, but it has French radars and British guns. It's just India is just weird in terms of how their military is put together. This started all the way back under President Bush, where India was beginning to be more friendly to the West, certainly the United States. And so we've been trying to diplomatically work on that relationship for a long time, almost 20 years, maybe even more than. I'd have to look at the start. So yeah, there's all sorts of deals we've been trying to reach. India's had several fallings out with the Russian military industrial suppliers. Most notably, India is incredibly unhappy with Russian T-90 tanks, which are supposedly Russia's best. Now, this was an export model specifically for India. It's the T-90S, if I'm getting that correct. The other big falling out they had was over the Su-57, the supposed Russian stealth jet, where India pulled out of that project in 2018. And one of the reasons why Russia doesn't have any Su-57s that are worth anything is they were depending on Indian financing for that project. India backed out because it's a basket case. The jet engines were not good enough. The radar was not good enough. The prototypes were built so weak that even in testing, they were supposed to be good through several years of testing, but after only a few months, some of the test jets were ruled structurally unsound because they were so lightly built. The reason for that is the engines lacked the thrust because they're not very good engines, that to get the performance, they made sacrifice on the structure of the jet. So you stress the jet enough, it starts to fall apart because physics doesn't lie and metal fatigue is real. So India was incredibly unhappy with the Su-57 project. The radar is another subject. So they've been looking for a real 4+ gen or 5th generation jet. They've got some indigenous things they've been working on, but they've been looking at Super Hornets from America, and now Trump offered them F-35s. It was a stunning sight. There was an air show in India where you had pictures with an F-35 and a Su-57 in the same picture on the same flight line. So that was a little bit astonishing.
It seems like it's a security issue. I mean, Trump's on about, national security risks in Canada, and offering F-35s, state-of-the-art fighter jets to India?
Well, don't don't assume he's going to be consistent. But in terms of building a diplomatic and strategic relationship, it makes sense.
Yeah, you could try that here. You could try that here in Canada.
Last I heard, Canada's getting F-35s. They should have.
Yeah, but that's only because we're going to be the 51st state.
Well, we can pivot to that if you want.
Well, maybe in a minute. Please continue with your original train of thought. Don't let me get you off into the weeds.
No, that's all right. India, like I said, India over Bush, Obama, Trump 1, Biden, and now Trump 2, has been an ongoing diplomatic effort to build stronger ties with. They were never unfriendly with the United States, kind of like Sweden and Finland. They were more or less neutral during the Cold War, but we've been trying to win them over for a solid 20 years. So offering them F-35s is, to me, not a bad move. It wouldn't surprise me if the talks about that even started under Biden. To me, that's a logical move. India was making noises about the Super Hornets, which might sound like they're not stealth jets, but their avionics, especially their radar and their other electronic warfare suite, it's not as good as the F-35 because it's not as comprehensive. But the parts that are on the F-18 Super Hornet are the equal of the F-35, and even if the entire suite is not the same. Especially the ASA radar on the Super Hornet might actually be better than the F-35s.
Well, so Keir Starmer was talking about possibly putting British troops into Ukraine, and some people concerned about that. Other European nations saying it's maybe too early to talk about that, but whatever is happening, everything's happening pretty quickly, so I don't know.
I don't think it's too early at all. If you're gonna actually have a peace in Ukraine, there's got to be security guarantees. Secretary of State Rubio stated that both territory and security guarantees were discussed today. One of the problems with, for instance, when Ukraine lost their nukes, lost their strategic bombers, after the breakup of the Soviet Union, I don't think people remember, in the early 1990s, Ukraine was actually a nuclear power, and they had the bombers to deliver the nukes. They had blackjacks and Tu-95s and a few other things inside of Ukraine. And they gave those up. That supposedly both the Russia and the United States guaranteed the sovereign integrity of Ukraine as a condition for Ukraine giving up their nuclear weapons. So it's we can talk about how Russia already broke their promises, but Ukraine's not going to go for another agreement that doesn't have robust and very real security guarantees. So there are some people that say, well, Ukraine should be a NATO member right now. I think they've made more rapid progress towards becoming a NATO member than anything else I can think of, but that's a complicated subject, and becoming a NATO member is a long, expensive, and complicated, to repeat the word. Sorry. It's a process to become a NATO member. It doesn't happen overnight. And we can talk about the NATO requirements that there can't be active warfare on the nation's territory. So people are talking about NATO membership. I don't see that happening inside of like the next 10 years. Even if they were on a path to NATO membership, which NATO has stated they are, that's not something that's going to happen right away, even under ideal circumstances.
Which is why the statements that came from Leslie Graham at the Munich Peace Conference, where
Senator Graham,
and he said, Lindsey Graham. So he's like, how about this? He says, how about if we don't put Ukraine into NATO, but if as your security guarantee, if Russia attacks again, then you go into NATO right away. And when I heard that, I thought, this doesn't even make sense. That can't work, because that's sort of the equivalent of putting them into NATO now. But then if they do get attacked, then that still doesn't work, because you can't join NATO when you're in a state of war.
Yeah, I read that quote when Senator Graham said it, and I don't remember what the exact quote is because I've read too much since then. But what he was saying was giving him a very strenuous, very strong security guarantee. And I think he was talking about NATO would come in on the side of Ukraine, is just don't take this lightly sort of security guarantee. This was already communicated to Russia under Biden, where if Russia popped a nuke, we would come at them hard, and they wouldn't even understand what was happening until it was over, kind of a thing. So this is not new. But I also think very strong security guarantees, like British troops, a European coalition of troops on Ukraine soil, it's not too soon to talk about that. This is, if we're going to open negotiations, that sort of talk needs to be on the table.
And it looks like the European nations are looking at, that they are talking about possibly a future for sort of a European NATO without the United States at all.
It's been raised before. The European Union has in the past talked about a European Union army. Zelenskyy brought that up again just in the last day or two. But it's not a new conversation. I don't think the EU is going to go for it, not with nations like Hungary in the EU, but something more of a coalition of EU nations providing actual troops inside of Ukraine might actually do that. But yeah, if the United States basically or actually withdraws from NATO, then that would be something that I don't see if they'd have much of an alternative. The European Union has benefited from NATO for 80 plus years at this point, and they like being part of NATO, they would continue it in some fashion.
So this is going to continue to play out. What happened today is just a first step toward something. Maybe it's not even, on the one side, I guess the assessment is that Russia is just kind of going through the motions, and they don't really have any intention of pursuing peace because.
Well, this might be a good time to pull up that Rubio tweet if you have it.
Sure. Let me see here.
This is then Senator Rubio back in 2022. He was the chairman, I believe, of the Senate Intelligence Committee, if I'm getting that correct. It was one of the important foreign policy committees in the Senate.
Okay, too many tabs open again. Lots and lots and lots. Give me just a second here. I will find it.
I understand. So in this tweet, Rubio is laying out the Russian plan, what I was talking about with fear, uncertainty, doubt, and despair, that this would be the Russian negotiating tactic, and he's right. This is one of the reasons why him as Secretary of State's one of the few cabinet choices I think that is at least decent.
Okay. I believe that's it right there. Yeah. A little hard to see it.
Yeah, I can't.
Says Secretary of State Marco Rubio should pay attention to Senator Marco Rubio from 3 years ago. This is you on X. And what he said 3 years ago is Putin still wants to capture Kyiv. This is Marco Rubio. Putin still wants to capture Kyiv and install a puppet government. But when he realizes that's not feasible, he will, one, focus on destroying as much of defense U as possible.
Defense of Ukraine.
Yeah, and two, then offer ceasefire that imposes neutrality on Ukraine and recognizes Crimea and Donbass as part of Russia.
And that's what Russia's looking at right now. They have failed to achieve military victory inside Ukraine. They haven't even, the only Ukrainian province they completely occupy right now is Crimea. And you could argue that's under dispute because Ukraine has denied Russia the use of naval ports and air bases inside of Crimea. So in some ways, Russia doesn't even control Crimea, even though they technically occupy all of the land area. But they don't have all of the Donbass or Luhansk or Kherson districts that they claim to have annexed as well. So they don't even hold that land yet. But what they're trying to do is achieve at the diplomatic table what they could not achieve militarily. And it seems like I'm crossing my fingers that Trump doesn't go along with this, but judging by that news conference today, I think there's a real worry that Trump's going to give Russia what they want.
Yeah, well, I guess it's easy to get peace if you just give up, right?
Yep. Well, no. So people should look at their history, and does Neville Chamberlain ring any bells in people's heads? In 1938, he negotiated with a certain dictator and future war criminal peace that, no, they're really not going to go into any more territories. They're not going to annex any more of Europe. He came home and he held the paper aloft. He got off that airplane in peace in our time, and then yeah, that didn't work out so well either.
But it seems that Trump and Putin share a new worldview where the strong major world powers basically get to do what they want and dictate to smaller, weaker nations, which is why Ukraine's not even being included in the negotiations at this point.
And this is a complete reversal from United States history, where when we took over land, we did not conquer it. We did not build an American empire. We rebuilt the land that we conquered to lesser or greater degrees of success. But we never wanted to run other nations because we found more benefit in having friends that were in independent nations, friends and allies and people that would cooperate with us. and this is very much his rhetoric is a complete reversal from American history.
But I've seen Steve Bannon, who I think he pretty much has a pretty good handle on what Trump is about and what his worldview is like. And in two separate interviews, one with GB out of Great Britain, and another one just yesterday, released by the Toronto Sun, Bannon talks about how Trump views the world, that this new world that is emerging, this new world order, even if you want to call it that, where it's like hemispheric domination. So the West will dominate here in North America, sort of Monroe Doctrine 2.0. But
Manifest destiny, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and so achieving that, the United States gets to sort of dictate to smaller countries like, say, Canada.
Yeah, I was thinking about that a lot because I didn't know any Ukrainians before 2017. That was the first time that I went as a member of the U.S. Air Force. But the 2014 Maidan Revolution, their struggles before that with Russian puppet governments, oligarchs that were basically taking orders from the Kremlin that were in charge of Ukraine. Basically what Belarus looks like today, Ukraine looked like before 2014, and then they had a revolution to gain their independence. But there were little green men, if you remember those, in the Donbass area.
Russian soldiers that weren't supposed to be there.
Yeah.
Russia denied were there. They just didn't have insignia on their
But
uniforms.
all the soldiers were tweeting. They would take selfies and post it on social media and like, look where I'm at. And so even though Russia was denying it, we had all of these soldiers that were the little green men that were obviously, acting on Russian orders. But it was before that, there were Russian assassinations when there were opposition figures inside of Ukraine that were pushing back against Russian interference in Ukraine. They were taken out on the side of the street. There were multiple versions of that. During the Maidan Revolution in Kyiv, Maidan Square, there were totally not Russian snipers that suddenly appeared on the hill of the government house that shot down into the civilians in Maidan Square. There was a building right off of the square that was burnt out that I did send you a picture of.
Yep, I'm getting it for you here, yeah.
And so this kind of the mindset of Ukraine, you've asked me before on multiple podcasts here, and then other people have asked me, why is Ukraine fighting back? Well, if you can look at that, it says in both Ukrainian and English with the same thing, the chains being broken. That banner, it says freedom is our religion. That banner is covering up the burnt out husk of a building that the either the Russians directly or the Russian-backed government that was overthrown had burned out this building right off of Maidan Square. It had been used as a ad hoc headquarters, if you want to call that, of the Maidan Revolution. As I am facing the square, there's the other picture. As I'm facing this square, if behind me and to the right is the government hill from which the sniper shot down into the crowd. So yeah, this is sacred ground to Ukrainians now because of the blood that Russia spilled. It's impactful to see how much the Ukrainians want their independence, how much they want their freedom, how much they want to be out from underneath of Russian oppression. That gigantic banner on the building is just one example. The building's since been repaired, so that banner's long gone. This is back in 2017, but it's very real. The fact that that's the imagery that they chose to use, the chains being broken, and freedom is sacred. is no accident. That's what they truly believe. That's what motivated Zelenskyy to say, "I don't need a riot, I need ammunition." So you might Canada might think about that as they experience people trying to overthrow the Canadian government.
Yeah, you know what, Peter? Peter's in the chat. Tired of these lies when we saw Victoria Nuland, Hillary Clinton handing out cookies to Ukraine Nazis. Remember that? Well, I got to go. Lies too much. Yeah, see you there, Peter, because I'm tired of the lies too. And what you're absorbing is, I would say, falsehoods. Mike?
Yeah, the Ukraine Nazis is another Russian talking point. Any nation's going to have their wackos. There's Nazis in America. There's Nazis in Canada. There's Nazis in Germany still, even though it's illegal. So that once the genie's out of the bottle, it's impossible to entirely put it back in. It even showed up in one of my favorite movies, Blues Brothers, if you remember that. One of the famous quotes is, "Man, I hate Illinois Nazis." It's one of my favorite quotes from that movie. But so yes, are there Nazis in Ukraine? Yes. There's also Nazis in Russia. So the play that got out of the Kremlin, blown out of all proportion. The Azov battalion is different than the Azov movement. Azov is a region inside of southern Ukraine that's currently under Russian occupation. It's surrounding Mariupol. It's that general location. The Azov battalion is a military unit from that area. The Azov movement is something different. Before the Azov battalion became a part of the Ukrainian military, it was at least somewhat linked to the Azov movement, but not as much as the Kremlin wants you to think. So I don't know where he was talking about with handing out cookies to Nazis. I don't get that at all. Zelenskyy has been accused of being a Nazi. People might not remember that Zelenskyy is Jewish, and some of his close family members died in the Holocaust. So,
well, I think that they conflate the word nationalist with Nazi.
Yes. Well, and there were some of this is true in America right now. Some of our Christian nationalist movement, especially like the people that were involved in the 2017 Charlottesville rally, they are ultra nationalists for the United States, and they're Nazis. So whenever you combine the ultra nationalism with this great replacement theory, or when the Charlottesville Nazis were saying they will not replace us, that's what they're talking about. So yeah, it's not nationalism per se, but it's when it's combined with the other aspects of it.
It's interesting, you know. I said last night there is a campaign underway to normalize the idea of even Canada being a Nazi nation.
Really?
Oh,
I
yeah.
hadn't heard that one yet.
Oh yeah.
I've heard that Canada is being accused of being communist or socialist or whatnot, which is of course ironic because the Nazis and the socialists, they were direct opposites.
Yeah, we're both things. We're Nazis, and we're controlled entirely by the Chinese Communist Party, and we flood the United States with fentanyl.
Never mind that those statements are mutually contradictory. They can't both be true at the same time.
They can if you're Russian.
Or if you're not paying attention or you don't actually understand what the terms mean.
Yeah, so, I see what's kind of going on there, but all of this is, it says to me that we are in the middle of a real realignment in terms of geopolitics and the creation of a new multipolar geopolitical reality, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And some of this is Russian. We've seen that on some of the influencers. We're seeing that honestly, I'm seeing that in the attempt to make Canada a 51st state. I think you need to push back on that. I think Canadians might be open to understanding why Ukraine has been fighting so hard, given what Canada is being accused of and being threatened with right now. Ukraine will know what you're talking about. Talk to some Ukrainians. They're like, yeah, I know how that is.
Yeah, it's very concerning to me when I see what the threat being presented to Canada, which I see, and I was actually saying this some time ago. I see similarities even between the Freedom Convoy and what happened in Maidan that led to a more serious outcome during the Maidan massacre, and then subsequently into this war that we now have here. But what's going on in Canada, I see some parallels emerging there. Do you see what I'm seeing?
I do. It's happening in the United States as well. I am less familiar with the history of these influence operations in Canada. I do know that it has been a very troublesome part of American political and cultural life for at least 15 years at this point. 2009, 2010 is when it really started hitting its stride in the United States. There was, anytime you have a political paradigm shift, there's going to be pushback and backlash, and then just people trying to insist that they should still have a voice and their issues are important. So the United States Tea Party movement was a bit of all of that combined together, prompted and spurred on by the election victory of President Obama. But whether it was from the start or whether it was just seen and then co-opted as an opportunity, it was very quickly taken over by, not taken over might be the wrong term, but it was very quickly heavily influenced by very pro-Russian voices. And this came shortly after President Putin's Munich speech, only a couple of years, where Putin was outlining everything that he's been doing since 2014. And so these influence operations inside the United States with the militias, the anti-constitution oath keepers, various militias, the Three Percenters, the Proud Boys. I'm missing a whole bunch of the big ones. There are so many of them. But it was this whole movement that was very anti-American Constitution, very one-party rule, very ultra-nationalist, and some of it was not Nazi, but there's Nazi elements in it. Certainly, white Christian nationalism, white being the racial thing. I don't know what the history is in Canada, but I definitely seen it starting to play out now inside of Canada. I see Russian talking points being used. It's a big problem. I don't think it's a new campaign out of Russia. I think it became acute inside of Canada very recently. But it's been a problem in the United States for a solid 15 years.
I would say that the information warfare being waged in Canada and to some degree in the US, but especially in Canada, the information warfare coming from Russia is helping along the whole growth of bigotry and the reemergence of these ideas from the past.
Well, and some of it is they don't necessarily, the Russians are the they in this situation. The Russians don't necessarily support or oppose some of these movements. In the United States, it would be, for instance, the Occupy Wall Street, the Black Lives Matter, Protect the Blue, the various militias that are, some of them were anyway relatively benign. They just wanted constitutional rule. We wanted to have an honest attachment to the Constitution. But what Russia would do is they would either put somebody into this group, or they would set up dummy accounts, especially on social media, where they would announce a fake demonstration. So, for instance, on a fake Black Lives Matter site, they would say, "Hey, these sovereign citizens and militias are going to have this rally at downtown at 2 p.m. on Saturday, and maybe you should go and counter demonstrate." Meanwhile, on a puppet militia site, they would say, "Hey, Black Lives Matter is going to be there on Saturday at 2." And so what they were trying to do is they were trying to set up some sort of violent clash, or at least something that would get the cameras on it. So that was going all the way back, at least into the 2015-2016 election, where that was one of the hard examples of Russia influence inside of America trying to go after the election. So support
Let's take a little break here.
Okay.
And then we'll come back and we'll get into the final leg of this. More with Mike McCarrick on the other side of this.
Maverick News. The world is watching. Greetings, brave Mavericks. Our quest for truth continues. We go beyond fake news. Together we expose propaganda. Together we pull others out of rabbit holes. We are maverick thinkers. We are all unique individuals, defenders of individual rights and freedoms, credible, trusted, grounded in reality. Maverick News, Maverick News. Defending free speech, Donate at freedomreporters.com. Do it now. Tomorrow may be too late. Maverick News. The world is watching.
Okay, let's bring Mike back in. So yeah, this has been very destabilizing. The Trump destabilizing everywhere, especially in Canada. Today, I saw the Liberal leadership front runner, Mark Carney, in Hamilton, saying that Canada needs to find new friends. Yeah, this is the guy who's likely going to become the next prime minister when he becomes the leader of the Liberal Party, and then of course we're going to go into an election. I never thought I'd hear that in my lifetime, but here we are.
It's just weird. I don't get the fight that Trump's trying to pick here. It didn't exist before. I mean, no nations are going to be ever in 100% agreement, which is a feature, not a bug. But you get, it would be difficult to find two nations that were friendlier than the United States and Canada. I don't get it. But here we are.
I think I do. I think I see where Trump is aligned. I think I see where his alliances are, and it's not where they have been through history.
Yeah, it's blowing up American history and sacrificing American credibility. I see it doing real damage to my country.
It's and I ultimately, I was speaking to someone who knows Russia pretty well, who said to me, this is like the fall of the Soviet Union, but now it's on the American side. But this is self-inflicted. Trump's economic policies, these tariffs, going to create huge inflation in the country. It's destroying trade relationships, defense relationships, just relationships with all the traditional allies. It's undermined trust, I think,
Yeah.
probably forever. You have Canada, Mexico on each side of the United States. He needs to be really careful because he thinks he can crush Canada and he thinks he can crush Mexico, but you take just Canada and Mexico, 42% of everything that goes into your country.
Yep.
So we just get together with Mexico, and everything that he's doing backfires on him in a really huge way. And then I know a little bit about economics because I studied it to some degree in university, and just sucking all the money out of the economy by cutting everything that they're cutting with Doge.
Yeah.
It's going to be result in massive economic contraction because there's nothing. It's creating an economic vacuum. It is the equivalent, in my view, of like economic shock therapy, which Professor Jeffrey Sachs, advocated for when he was working with Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union. And as a result of that, a lot of very rich Russian oligarchs got a whole lot richer, and a
Yeah.
whole bunch of new oligarchs were minted at that time when the economy crashed, and that was a rigged crash, if you will. And then, of course, if you know when it's going to crash, and these businesses go pretty much belly up, then the rich guys move in and they can buy everything up for pennies, 10 cents on the dollar or less. The Soviet, the Russian administration at the time got to pick who would be able to buy those nationalized assets at that point and privatize them cheap.
Well,
And I see this similar kind of thing happening here. This is an oligarchy, and Trump's talking about getting rid of corruption. This smacks of corruption to me.
Oh yeah, and even today, the whole idea of SpaceX has had problems with the FAA getting clearances and approval for safety approval for their spacecraft and rockets and all that. And now SpaceX is at the FAA telling them how to be more efficient. So the conflict of interests going on are just staggering, and it's difficult to keep up. But the difference now is that the guardrails are being attacked from basic things like the inspector generals and the anti-corruption officials that are being sacked to some limited success. Some of the courts have been reinstalling these people that Trump tried to fire. But the courts are under attack too. The vice president recently said this is an unconstitutional usurpation of executive power. Never mind that it's very much in the court's Article 3 constitutional powers to be the arbiters of what's legal and what's not. That's kind of what that branch of government's for. They're going after the guardrails. The Trump administration is going after the American guardrails that were meant to protect us from something like this. So how effective the guardrails will be going forward is uncertain, which in itself is a scary statement because in 2017, the guardrails were very much in place. Trump had appointed a whole bunch of adults into his cabinet. The favorite Secretary of Defense that I ever worked for was Jim Mattis, And he was Trump's Secretary of Defense for 2 years. So my favorite Secretary of Defense was in the first Trump administration. So, we'll see how it goes now. Marco Rubio is not my favorite person. At least he's there. I don't trust Hegseth as far as I can throw whatever he's drinking today. So it's just, we'll see where it goes, but just the fact that I am unsure if the guardrails are still going to be effective going forward is it seems such a bland statement, but it should terrify everybody that thinks about it.
And so much of what is being said, what is being done, smacks of hypocrisy. Trump sits there and talks about democracy, and yet he's really ruling with a Sharpie, signing executive order after executive order after executive order.
Did you use that on purpose? Sorry, do you remember Sharpie Gate? That was when Trump was trying to overrule the hurricane predictive path, and he came in and like altered a hurricane prediction with a Sharpie. So every time Trump and Sharpie come up, Sharpie Gate is, of course, that conversation.
Well, I have a totally different take on where Trump is at, because people think that he's very powerful right now. But what I see going on is, it tells me that he's very weak. Because if he was really strong, he would have the support of the people, and he wouldn't need to use executive orders to get what he wants.
Yeah. So, and one of the talking points I've heard recently from a very pro-Trump friend is that if you want to look at Doge and where the legalities of this are, well, you just need to look to what Bill Clinton did in 1993 through 1995. Where he trimmed a lot of the federal bureaucracy and workforce and did all sorts of things. What they fail to mention is that President Clinton signed an executive order authorizing the beginning of that process, but that resulted in 6 months of studies and then congressional legislation to authorize it, and then it took place over 3 years. It wasn't this instantaneous BS that we're seeing right now, where you've got people that have no idea what they're doing. That one of the things from the last week, they fired the people that are protecting the nuclear stockpile and running the nuclear reactor waste centers, the cooling ponds, as it were. And they got fired, and then all of a sudden, oops, my bad. They tried to hire him back. But man, if I was one of those fired people, I probably wouldn't go back, because why would I have any reason to trust the Trump administration after that? The astonishing incompetence and ignorance on display is just almost impossible to comprehend. It's the guardrails are a problem. One of the things to remember, though, is that in both elections Trump won, in the Electoral College, he never once got a popular vote majority. Now, in 2016, he lost the popular vote. In 2024, he won a plurality of the popular vote, but he didn't break 50%. So it's important to remember that in both 2016 and 2024, Trump failed to win a majority of American voters. So that tells you where his support is, that in both elections, a majority of Americans voted against Trump.
And a lot of people don't want to hear this stuff, but it's all true. And I also see, this is what's very alarming to me, with the purging of civil servants and just the complete destruction of a lot of government programs. I see a lot of similarities, parallels to what happened in the 1930s when the Nazis took power in Germany, and you had the Enabling Act in 1933, and that, the Nazis went through and they passed the civil service law that same year, and they went through and they started to just fire civil servants, just get everybody out of the government administration and bureaucracy that wasn't in alignment with their ideology, their program. And then they started to purge their political opponents, and it created an atmosphere of fear and oppression, which is, I think, really what's kind of unfolding here now. It's like, if you don't toe the line, if you don't do as you're told, you're going to lose your job. And we're talking about people, working in the motor vehicle department to hand out driver's licenses. It's
The National Park Service
yeah,
is being purged.
right. So you have to have political views in alignment with the deity in the White House. Otherwise,
Because
you're going to lose your job.
Heaven forbid that a park ranger at Yellowstone National Park is, gonna like do something, I guess, to hurt Trump. Yeah.
This is
But
kind
that's
of
the
where
level
we're
we're at.
Yeah, it is. And the Soviets did the same thing. First when Lenin took power, he went through and purged all the people that didn't agree with him. And I understand how people are like, well, yeah, but the deep state stopped Trump in his first administration. Otherwise, he would have been able to get done what he wanted to get done. Yeah, I kind of get it, but this is a bridge too far, in my
So
view.
people are talking about deep state and all that kind of stuff, but that's a gross misunderstanding of how the United States is supposed to work. The president is not a king. At most, he is the, on paper, head of 1/3 of the United States government. And he has certain powers, but he has certain obligations too. For instance, he can't make law, and that's one of the reasons why some of these cuts are being opposed so forcefully and so successfully already in the courts, that the president is authorized to enforce the law, but he cannot make the law, and he certainly can't violate the law in terms of going against what was authorized and signed. So some of the people that he fired, he didn't have the authority to fire. Yeah, they work in the executive branch, but their job, their funding, their authority are coming out of congressional legislation, and that legislation specifies the conditions upon which they can be fired. So there are several people that are successfully suing in the courts where the Trump administration tried to fire them, but they got reinstated because the court said president doesn't have the authority. So it's important to remember that the president is not the king. We fought a war in 1776 to get rid of a king. There's a reason why we don't have a king. And Trump cannot be that king. So when you're talking about the deep state and all that kind of stuff, are these people really arguing that Trump should have unfettered power, that there shouldn't be any guardrails, that the president can do whatever he wants? That it's, as various dictators through history have said, if I do it, it's legal.
Well, let me say
Is
this.
that
like,
really what
I've-
people want?
I mean, I've listened to some X spaces where some of the more extreme voices are at times on the MAGA side, and out near the fringes even, and a lot of these people, and I think even people within the Trump administration, they don't really believe in democracy anymore, because they don't feel like they can win elections, because they feel like the system is stacked against them, that it's all rigged. So they just want what they want, and they don't really care how Trump does it. They just want what they want. But that's not freedom. That's not democracy. And case in point, censorship. He signs an executive order saying that he's doing away with censorship. So censorship problem is supposed to be solved now. But then they turn around and in some, and I guess they're banning books. I have to get the exact areas where this is being banned, but one of the books that the Trump administration has targeted is this book here called Freckle-Faced Strawberry by Julianne Moore, which shocked a lot of people. It's a book about, did I just take it off the screen there? Or
No, it's up.
No, it's still up. Okay, so it's Freckle-Faced Strawberry. It's about a little girl, it's a kid's book, who has freckles and is embarrassed by them, and then just learns to accept herself and love herself, I guess. I haven't read the book, but that's the storyline, and learns that through self-acceptance that she's different, just like everybody else. And so this is up for review. I guess they're going to potentially ban this one too.
Yeah, there's been Julianne Moore is a great actress. Just putting that out there. But there's been a few of these cases, and people are pushing back like they should. It's kind of funny because if you ever want to know what books that you should read, what you should do is you should go to the list of books that somebody wants to ban, and those are the books that you should read. Just as, a rule of thumb. You don't have to agree with the book to read it. I'm just going to say I've read a lot of books that I disagree with. But one of the things that people are making a public stand on is, okay, you're going to try and ban freckle-faced strawberry for reasons, I guess. But one of the more successful ones recently is the opposition groups have successfully banned the Bible because you can find it advocates for slavery. There's the thing where somebody buys a wife using 250 foreskins of their captured enemy prisoners that they cut off. All sorts of just really weird stuff in the Bible. Highly entertaining book, but really weird stuff, and it is not for kids. Some of those things that they never teach you in church. And so they successfully banned the Bible because it's not for children in a lot of the parts of the Bible. But when you've got these Christian nationalists that are trying to ban freckle-faced strawberry, or, the Air Force at least temporarily banned teaching the Tuskegee Airmen's history, or, the movie like Glory that talks about the 54th Massachusetts, which was a black regiment that fought in the Civil War. It's the ridiculousn's of the banning is being pushed back on, and I think successfully. But if you want to go after Christian nationalists, well, you got to go after them where it hurts them the most, and there you are.
Well, I think this should serve as a warning to everybody here in our community, in our Maverick family, because from the beginning, we've all identified here as being a bunch of misfits. We're basically a bunch of misfits on the island of misfit toys. We came together here, most of us, because we felt like we were being marginalized in many ways during the pandemic and left to the side by people who were powerful, who didn't recognize our individual rights and freedoms, and we embrace individuality and being different. And when I see a book like Freckle-Faced Strawberry being banned, and it is banned, I guess, at where is it banned? The Department of Defense's education activity.
Oh, probably the Dodea schools.
160 schools.
Yeah, the Dodea
defenders.
schools.
Yeah.
The Dodea schools, the Department of Defense Education. Yeah.
So we're all a bunch of misfits here, folks. And with something like this is like, to me, I take it personally because it's like an assault on everybody here.
I'm going to completely
we're all weirdos here.
I'm going to completely nerd out and quote Spock with the Star Trek Vulcan rule of infinite diversity and infinite combinations is what you actually want to go after, not prevent.
I agree.
As somebody, this has been a recent topic of conversation in my life, where one of the things, I was 22 years military, and one of the things that the military is built on are teams. If you think about how military things are organized, well, if you got to repair an F-16, you've got a ground crew. You've got some sort of middle to senior sergeant in charge of anywhere from 2 to 10 people that are working on some version of a jet. For the big jets, probably more than 10 people. But like for an F-16, you might have 4 or 5 people and then a sergeant. And you've got a team. How do you build that team? How do you effectively build a team? How do you effectively run the team? What makes a successful team? What makes an unsuccessful team? And as somebody that has had to be both a follower and a leader and a builder of these teams, what you're looking for is, and this is a horrible word in the MAGA world, is you're looking for diversity. As a leader, you do not ever want a group that you are trying to lead that thinks like you do. You don't want that. That's a horrifying prospect. If the members of your team think like you do, then somebody is either not thinking or you're going to become intellectually sterile. It's going to be unproductive as a team. You want somebody with a background that's different than yours. You want somebody with an education that's different than yours. You want somebody that's smarter than you in different subjects. Basically, you want to build a diverse team because in that way, you can rely on somebody else's experience and expertise that you don't have. And they can cover, their expertise can cover your ignorance, and your expertise can cover their ignorance. And that's how you put together and build a team. You embrace those differences, and that's where the good teams come from. So,
well, we have a great team here. I'll tell you, not everybody. Some people like to kick me in the shins every night, but overall, we've got a great team of misfits here. We're just underdogs all the way around, and I like it that way. And Lindy is asking again where this book or these books, and this is just one of many that has been banned by the Trump administration. Freckle-faced strawberry. It's banned in the Department of Defense's education activity, a global network of 160 schools that serves military families.
So if somebody are wondering what, that's DODEA, DODEA. Sorry if I'm using acronyms. One of the things that they tell you when you retire from the military is to try and avoid acronyms and jargon, and I just threw DODEA as the jargon made out of an acronym. So sorry about that. The Department of Defense schools, because when you join the military, they talk about service in the military. In a lot of ways, you are a servant. You go where you're ordered, you do what you're told, within certain, of course, legal bounds. There's guardrails on what's legal and an illegal order, but for the most part in the military, you are ordered to uproot your family from wherever you are. Say you're in Texas and they say, okay, you're going to Germany, or you're going to Japan, or you're going to South Korea, or hey, I hear Guam is nice this time of year. So you're just going something completely different. You might or might not take your family with you, but if you do take your family, you uprooted everything. There probably aren't schools there. So in order for this to work, the Department of Defense runs a whole bunch of schools just so that the military can function properly. And you've got people that aren't, their home life is solid enough where their kids have a school and all that kind of stuff, that they can be functional at work. And so that's where DODEA comes from, the Department of Defense schools. Because it is such an executive branch thing, there's a certain amount of latitude. Now, how legal this is, I haven't looked that hard into it, because the service members raised their right hand and swore the oath to support and defend and follow the orders. Their spouses and children did not. So even though the military member is under oath, under a far more restrictive legal code of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, their civilian family members are not, and they retain a lot of the rights that normal American citizens everywhere enjoy. So how much of this is legal and how much of it is not remains to be seen. But yeah, that's the situation in terms of the DODEA schools. For the record, my children attended DODEA schools between 2016 and 2021 while I was stationed in Germany.
Well, anybody going there now, they're going to have a restricted reading list or availability of books now.
It's kind of funny because this was during the first Trump administration. Funny, strange, not funny, haha. During the COVID lockdowns, the DODEA schools, I was in Germany at the time, the Dodea schools did not have a distance learning curriculum. They purchased the rights to this really weird white nationalist thing out of Florida. And I was trying to help my kids do their social studies homework. And they were talking about how America, what kind of immigrants came to America at different times. And they were talking about people from Northern Europe, and then colonist from Africa is how they stated the slaves that were forcibly taken from their homes and, shipped over, and colonist from Africa. So there's the white nationalist movement managed to get in there. I protested that one officially. I'm like, there is not a chance that my children are going to be part of this curriculum. But there are avenues, because, like I said, and I have personal experience. That's why I brought up this story, that my children were American citizens. They were not military members. They had rights, and that sort of curriculum was not okay. Yeah. So yes, official protest. It eventually got removed, but I had withdrawn my kids from school, and we did Khan Academy, which is a relatively good online program.
Which is another reason why, we need to make sure we save Canada, because as much as I love the United States, our history here is somewhat different. And, I think that in some ways we've helped the United States along the path to a better future, and with things like the Underground Railroad, freeing slaves, that, to leading to emancipation. Just our history here has been different, and we are just a little bit different, very similar, and great neighbors, great friends, relatives, but just a little bit different.
There was when I lived in Georgia, which is part of the American Bible Belt for people that don't know America as well. And it was part of the old Confederacy. It was very much a slave state. There was a person that I knew down there that was trying to tell me that the Constitution of the Confederate States of the United States had banned the international slave trade, which is true. The Constitution of the Confederacy had banned the importation of slaves. And they were trying to tell me that was the first time that happened. But since you brought up Canada, which was part of the British Empire at the time, the British Empire had banned it a long time before that. So yeah, you're right. And this goes back to what we were saying with the United States benefits from having friendly allied nations that are cooperating, where the idea of having a friendly nation that we can cooperate and trade with and be friendly with and all that kind of stuff helps us. It is far better than any other situation that you can put together.
And even superpowers need friends.
Yeah.
And the weakest of us need friends too. And that's why, I think we need to remember that as much as Donald Trump thinks that everything revolves around the almighty dollar and how much is invested, and therefore he wants half of Ukraine's precious earth resources, we have to remember that Ukraine has paid a much higher price in blood and in the loss of so many lives.
The draft of that proposed agreement leaked. I don't remember if I sent it to you. I have it on Twitter, but you're right. This is one of the areas where I actually think that there's room for a real agreement on, where in exchange for ongoing American help and security guarantees, well, maybe we can get some sort of agreement on the mineral rights. I think that's a legitimate question, but the draft agreement that the United States Secretary Treasury, along with Jack Posobiec, an actual Nazi, brought to President Zelenskyy was just horrifying. It was 50% of everything for the entire, future, 50% of Ukraine's mineral rights in perpetuity. And no, we're not going to give you a security guarantee. This is just entirely payback for the support that America has given Ukraine so far.
And it seems entirely inappropriate to see someone like Jack Posobiec, who's
Jack Posobiec, who is an actual Nazi.
And he's not elected to anything.
Nope. So Jack Posobiec has been a right-wing agitator in the United States. I mentioned that we've had a problem with this for a solid 15 years. Back in the 2012, 2014, 2016 timeframe, he was posting all sorts of content that is in relationship to the I should pull up the actual quote. It's in relationship to the what I mentioned, the Great Replacement Theory. Is this my profile? No, it wasn't on there where I explained it. So it's in because this is one of the big talking points of the extreme white Christian nationalists, which translates to Nazi in America, but white Christian nationalist movement in the United States. He was in that conversation, he was using the term 1488, which people might not actually know. I'm getting to it. Hold on. So 1488 is Nazis online in some of the black parts of the web that they're still trying to avoid the algorithms that will go after like the hate speech and stuff like that. 14 is Nazi speak for what is called the 14 words. 14 words are literally these words. Quote, "We must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children," end quote. Those are the 14 words. The 88 refers to the 8th letter of the English alphabet, which is 8, which is H, I mean. And that is Heil Hitler. So it literally says, quote, "We must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children, Heil Hitler," end quote. And that's the kind of stuff that Jack Posobiec was putting out again and again and again and again. It wasn't a one-off. It wasn't just one thing. It wasn't him just trying to be cute. It wasn't him trying to rile things up. This is actually what he was pushing. So when you're talking about...
Well, no doubt accusing Ukrainians who just want their home protected of being Nazis.
Yep. And this was part of the official Trump delegation to Zelenskyy trying to secure mineral rights in Ukraine.
Which seems extremely authoritarian to me.
So just so people know what they're dealing with. Yeah.
And, in simple terms, folks, things are not right. This is not what people are saying. What he's doing, what people voted for. He's doing what the voters wanted him to do. I don't think so. Not really. I think that people are being told that. But can you tell me what those 400 plus? I think we're up to 400 executive orders. Is that right? Something like that. It's massive.
It's absurd. It broke all the previous records.
People, you don't know what he's doing. Nobody knows.
So I don't know how many people know it's yet another acronym in the military world. I don't know how civilian it is, but FAFO, F-A-F-O.
Yeah.
You know what that stands for?
F around and find out.
Yeah. So we're in the find out stage.
Yeah.
And so there were a lot of people that were upset with Biden for any number of reasons that either stayed home or they say, okay, well, we'll give Trump a try. And they didn't vote for this. They were voting for, okay, inflation stinks. There was a whole section of people, and especially in places like Michigan, that were like, we can't stand what Biden was doing in Israel, Palestine, and the Gaza war. So we're either going to vote for somebody else or stay home. And like single issue things, kind of that was a lot. But economic was one of the big ones. There was some culture wars stuff where they didn't necessarily like the extreme left wing was pushing. And so it's a lot of baby with the bathwater. They were upset with something specific And so they decided to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So now we're in the find out stage.
Which is why I keep saying to people, too, you don't give Canadians, don't give up your country because Donald Trump is promising you a tax cut. Don't give up your country because you're upset with Justin Trudeau. Don't give up your country because Donald Trump is talking to you and getting you upset about drag queen story time or some other cultural issue that you're not in alignment with the current government. Those are issues that are decided, in terms of policy and through elections. But if you give up your country, you're giving up your right to self-determination, your sovereignty, your destiny as a Canadian for your kids. Now, I guess maybe we might have a destiny then as Americans, but it would be a whole lot different. And I guarantee you're gonna miss it when it's gone, if it's gone.
Yeah, I think it's important to push back. As much as I hate to keep pounding, I don't hate to keep pounding. As much as I keep pounding the importance of defending Ukraine, I think the Canadians should maybe look at what Ukraine went through and see how it applies to the current situation. Maybe use that as a window to understand what Ukraine is going through. There's a lot to be learned right now.
Yeah, and a lot of people who have been presenting themselves as freedom fighters and patriots are now revealing themselves to be, I would say, traitors to Canada.
Well, Jack Posobiec was presenting himself as a freedom fighter and a patriot, and as recently, I had that written down. Hold on. Last year at the CPAC conference, I just got rid of the quote. Jack Posobiec, there's an audio out there where he literally says his goal is to destroy American democracy. Those are the words that came out of his mouth 1 year ago. So, yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of the warnings that some people were issuing about Mr. Trump are now coming to pass. And I have to say, I'm disturbed, and I think that he has duped us.
Well, what he was saying on the campaign trail is what he's doing. So it's one of those, after round, now you're finding out.
Well, Mike, is there anything else that you might want to touch on tonight that we've missed?
Let me go look at my notes.
I'll tell you, do you take a moment? I'm going to run this just so we can reflect a little bit on where Ukraine is at, and so we can acknowledge as well that, it's Ukraine that has paid the biggest price here, made the biggest sacrifice in terms of blood, not treasure, but blood. And let us remember that, and we'll come back after this and get a final thought from Mike, and then I'll make an announcement about tomorrow night's program.
We watched the old wall crumble, we heard the freedom's call, but now it's rising higher under Putin's shadowed thrall. From Ukraine's fields to Moscow's streets, a cold divide begins to creep. A world of fear where truth is bent and promises are sold too cheap. All in all, it's just another brick in the wall. All in all, we're calling Putin's fall. We don't need their blind instruction, we've seen the lies unfold. All in all, it's just another brick in the wall. Glory of days long past, where all would kneel before his cast. With tanks and threats he stakes his claim, while silencing those who dare to blame. Propaganda clouds the mind, we don't need no education. Blind to the bloodshed and the strife, where Putin's dreams cut deep like knives. Can't you hear the children cry? Can't you see the tanks roll by? In Putin's world where truth is broken, we're just pawns in the lies unspoken. A wall of fear, a wall of light, where freedom fades into the night. We stand upon the edge once more as Cold War ghosts return to life. They tell us not to question, to walk in shadowed lines. But we've seen the fall, we felt the cold, we know the weight of all their crimes. Ukraine's cries, a world denied, a broken bridge that's left behind. Putin's quest for power's throne, they're building walls we can't condone. All in all, it's just another brick in the wall. All in all, we're trapped within his thrall. We don't need their false direction, we see through the stories they've sold. All in all, it's just another brick in the wall. So if we rise, if we resist, we break the walls they built like fists. For in our hearts where hope is strong, there's strength to fight against the wrong. But if we fall, if we concede, remember what the future needs. All in all, it's just another brick in the wall. So if we rise, if we resist, we break the walls they've built like fists. For in our hearts where hope is strong, there's strength to fight against the wrong. But if we fall, if we concede, remember what the future needs. All in all, it's just another brick in the wall.
The floor is yours.
Well, it's interesting seeing those pictures. Ukraine was the third combat zone that I went to, and the smell of a city at war is something you don't forget. The look in the faces of the old people that can't leave, the stray pets that are turning feral because their owners evacuated and either they couldn't find their pet or had to leave them behind for various reasons. It's not something you should forget, not something you should take lightly, and not something that you should play games with in terms of misattributing who's actually responsible for what's going on. We're in a dangerous part of history. And I know as somebody that grew up studying history and military history specifically, it's a lifelong passion of mine. One of the things that you think about when you're reading about the 1930s or any other horrible part of history is, man, if I was alive back then, what would I have done? Would I have resisted? Would I have sheltered people? Would I have built a little cabinet in my attic for somebody to live in and escape? The answer is what you do now is what you would have done then. So don't fool yourself into thinking that, oh, I would have acted differently, and then you act in a way today that is nothing like the way that you thought that you should act back then. How you act now is how you would have acted then. How you act now matters. What you choose to support matters. The outcomes of who you support are real. They can be painful. So yeah, how you acted then is how you act now is how you would have acted then, and it's important. So yeah, do what you need to do something important. Don't stop, don't give up, don't hide, don't be a victim of the FUD, fear, uncertainty, doubt, and despair. It's okay to examine the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, but never, ever, ever let yourself reach the despair point, There's always always a point, always something you can do, even if it's small. So yeah, act now like it matters, because it does.
And I have faith in all of you out there, my Maverick family. We're all being tested right now. Let's rise to the occasion. I love you guys. I'll be back tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, with PPC candidate, Canadian People's Party of Canada candidate Michael Bator, for an online meet and greet. It'll be interactive, and you will be able to call in and ask him questions and speak with him directly. He's the, I'd say, the most prominent PPC candidate in Canada, aside from the leader, Maxime Bernier. So don't miss it tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Eastern, on the flip side. See you then.
This has been a Maverick Multimedia production.